Hello, everyone. This is the Dialectical House Party recording for February 26, 2026. In this recording, we continue our reading from the book Curriculum of the Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, Part 1. The book is subtitled The Worldview and Philosophical Methodology of Marxism-Leninism, and it's translated from the original Vietnamese by Luna Nguyen. In episode 5, we closed at the point where we begin annotation 110 on the characteristic of generality of relationships. Let's read. The characteristic of generality of relationships. According to the dialectical viewpoint, there is no thing, phenomena, nor idea that exists in absolute isolation from other things, phenomena, and ideas. And now we begin annotation 110. Although all things, phenomena, and ideas have the characteristic of externality and objectiveness to all other things, phenomena, and ideas, see annotation 108, page 112. This does not mean that they exist in isolation. Isolation implies a complete lack of any relationships with other things, phenomena, and ideas. On the contrary, according to the principle of general relationships, see page 107, all things, phenomena, and ideas have relationships with all other things, phenomena, and ideas. And when you go through this paragraph, it's easy to get lost in the words, but I think it's actually quite simple when you break it down, which is we are both external to things, but also we have relationships with things within the universe itself. And by universe, I include everything, which is what universe means, isn't it? Simultaneously, there is also no known thing, phenomena, nor idea that does not have a systematic structure, including component parts which in turn have their own internal relationships. This means that every existence is a system, and more so, is an open system that exists in relation with other systems. All systems interact and mutually transform one another. And now we begin annotation 111. As explained above, a systematic structure is a structure which includes within itself a system of component parts and relationships. It has been postulated by some scientific models that there may be some, quote, fundamental base particle, end quote, quarks, prions, etc., which, if true, would mean that there is a certain material component which cannot be further broken down. However, this would not contradict the principle of materialist dialectics of general relationships, which states that all things, phenomena, and ideas interact with and mutually transform one another. See annotation 107, page 110. The characteristic of diversity of relationships. In addition to affirming the objectiveness and generality of relationships, the dialectical viewpoint of Marxism-Leninism also emphasizes the diversity of relationships. The characteristic of diversity is defined by the following features. All things, phenomena, and ideas have different relationships. Every relationship plays a distinct role in the existence and development of the things, phenomena, and ideas which are included within. Any given relationship between things, phenomena, and ideas will have different characteristics and manifestations under different conditions and or during different periods of motion and or at different stages of development. Annotation 112. One of Marxism's critical observations was that things are defined by their internal and external relationships, including human beings. For example, in Theses on Feuerbach, Marx wrote that, quote, the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In reality, it is the ensemble of the social relations, end quote. It is only through relationships, through mutual impacts and transformations, that things, phenomena, and ideas, including human beings and human societies, change and develop over time. All of these relationships, which both define and transform all things, phenomena, and ideas in existence exist in infinite diversity. See annotation 107, page 110. Annotation 112 continued. Just as things, phenomena, and ideas change and transform through the course of relations with one another, the nature of the relationships themselves also change and develop over time. Characteristics refer to the features and attributes that exist internally within a given thing, phenomena, or idea. Manifestation refers to how a given thing, phenomena, or idea is expressed externally in the material world. For example, a ball may have the characteristics of being made of rubber, having a mass of 100 grams and having a melting point of 260 degrees Celsius. It may manifest by bouncing on the ground, having a spherical shape, and having a red appearance to human observers. If 10 such balls exist, they will all be slightly different, even if they have the same size, or rather the same mass and material composition. They will have slightly different variations in size, shape, etc. Even if each ball will melt at 260 degrees centigrade, the melting will manifest differently for each ball. They will melt into slightly different shapes, at slightly different speeds, etc. Relationships also have characteristics and manifestations. For example, the moon's orbit around the Earth is a relationship. It has characteristics such as the masses of each related body, forces of gravity, and other factors which produce and influence the orbit. The same orbital relationship also has manifestations, such as the duration of the moon's orbit around the Earth, the size of its ellipse, the orbit's effects on the tides of the Earth's ocean, etc. Characteristics and manifestation correspond, respectively, to the philosophical category pair of content and form, which is discussed in section page 147. Therefore, no two relationships are exactly the same, even if they exist between very similar things, phenomena, and ideas, and or in very similar situations. It is also important to note that the characteristic of diversity also applies to things, phenomena, and ideas themselves. In other words, every individual thing, phenomena, and idea in existence also manifests differently from every other thing, phenomena, and idea in existence, even if they seem quite similar. Meaning of the methodology. Based on the objective and popular characteristics of relationships, we can see that in our cognitive and practical activities, we have to have a comprehensive viewpoint. Having a comprehensive viewpoint requires that in the process of perceiving and handling real-life situations, humans have to consider the internal dialectical relationships between the component parts, factors, and aspects within a thing or phenomena. We also need to consider the external mutual interactions they have with other things, phenomena, and ideas. Only on such a comprehensive basis can we properly understand things and phenomena, and then effectively handle problems in real life. So the comprehensive viewpoint is the opposite of a unilateral and or metaphysical viewpoint. See annotation 51, page 49, in both perception and practice. And this is a comment from me. This is very much a key insight, or rather a key point to absorb into your thoughts, because as complex as this topic may appear, particularly to those of us who were not raised with a dialectical viewpoint, and there are indeed traditions, such as the Vietnamese tradition, in which that is not the case, in which people are taught to think in terms of relationships and in terms of having a larger viewpoint. For those of us who were raised, sadly, in the Western tradition of siloed ideas and siloed thinking, this may be difficult to grasp. And this may explain why, for example, when those of us who critique so-called AI, the resistance that we get to even the idea of critique is that there is one thing going on. And when you introduce into the conversation other things that are going on, such as energy, such as labor, such as a political economy, this confuses the people with whom you are having a conversation or debating, because they only think about one thing at a time. And this is a consequence of the way that minds are trained within what we call, euphemistically, the West. And now we begin annotation 113. Lenin said, quote, "If we are to have true knowledge of an object, we must look at and examine all of its facets, its connections, and mediaces, indirect relationships." Annotation 113, and this is a comment from me, annotation 113 includes a graphic which you will see on your screen now, if you're watching the video, which is labeled Comprehensive Viewpoint, and also labeled The Subject Exists as a Collection of Internal and External Relationships, and subtitled The Comprehensive Viewpoint Sees the Subject in Terms of All of its Internal and External Relationships. Now let's continue the reading. Consider a factory. A factory exists as a collection of internal relationships between the workers, between machines, between the workers and the machines, etc., and external relationships between the factory and its suppliers, between the factory and its customers, between the factory and the city, etc. In order to have a comprehensive viewpoint when examining the factory, one must consider and understand all of the internal and external relationships which define it. The diversified characteristic of relationships, see annotation 107, page 110, shows that in human cognitive and practical activities, we have to simultaneously use a comprehensive viewpoint and a historical viewpoint. Having a historical viewpoint requires that in perceiving and handling real-life situations, we need to consider the specific properties of subjects, including their current stage of motion and development. We also need to consider that the exact same methods can't be used to deal with different situations in reality. Our methods must be tailored to suit the exact situation based on material conditions. And now we move on to annotation 114. Let's read. While the comprehensive viewpoint focuses on internal and external relationships of subjects, the historical viewpoint focuses on the specific properties of subjects, especially the current stage of motion and development. In order to have a proper historical viewpoint, we must study and understand the way a subject has developed and transformed over time. To do this, we must examine the history of the subject's changes over time, hence the term historical viewpoint. In addition, it's important to understand that no two situations which we might encounter will ever be exactly the same. This is because the component parts and relationships that make up any given situation will manifest differently. So in order to properly deal with situations, we have to understand the component parts and relationships of examined objects, as well as their histories of development, so that we can develop plans and strategies that are suitable to the unique circumstances at hand. For example, it would be disastrous if communists today tried to employ the exact same methods which were used by the Communist Party of Vietnam in the 20th century to defeat Japan, France, and the USA. This is because the material conditions and relationships of Vietnam in the 20th century were very different from any material conditions existing on Earth today. It is possible to learn lessons from studying the methods of the Vietnamese Revolution and to adapt some such methods to our modern circumstances. But it would be extremely ineffective to try to copy those methods and strategies exactly as they manifested then and there to the here and now. In order to come up with suitable and effective solutions to deal with real-life problems, we must clearly define the roles and positions of each specific relationship that comes into play, and the specific time, place, and material conditions in which they exist. Now we move on to annotation 115, which also includes a very lovely graphic. The graphic is labeled Historical Viewpoint, and it shows, actually there's a bit of text for the graphic that reads as follows: understand roles and positions of relationships and properties of subjects. And then there is a graphic that shows the movement of time. Understand development of relationships and properties of subjects over time. And the subtitle of the graphic is A Historical Viewpoint focuses on the roles and positions of relationships and properties of subjects as well as their development over time. Now let's read. The role of a relationship has to do with how it functions within a system of relationships, and the position it refers to in its placement amongst other subjects and relationships. Consider once again the example of the factory. See annotation 113, page 116. In addition to its internal and external relationships, the factory also has various roles. It functions within various systems and from various perspectives. For instance, the factory may have the role of financial asset for the corporation that owns it. It may have the role of place of employment for the surrounding community. It may have the role of supplier for various customers, etc. The factory is also positioned among other subjects and relations. If it's the only employer in town, then it would have a position of great importance to the people of the community. If, on the other hand, it is just one of hundreds of factories in a heavily industrialized area, it may have a position of much less importance. It may have a position of great importance to an individual factory worker who lives in poverty in an economy where there are very few available jobs, but of less importance to a freelance subcontractor for whom the factory is just one of many customers, and so on. These positions and roles will change over time. For example, the factory may initially exist as a small workshop with a small handful of workers, but it may grow into a massive factory with hundreds of employees. It is vital to understand this principle of development, which is discussed in more detail on the next page. In summary, proper dialectical materials analysis requires a comprehensive and historical viewpoint. We must consider subjects both comprehensively in terms of the internal and external relationships of the subject itself, as well as historically in terms of roles and positions of subjects, as well as their relationships, material conditions, and development over time. So in perception and practice, we have to avoid and overcome sophistry and eclectic viewpoints. Now let's read annotation 116. Sophistry is the use of falsehoods and misleading arguments, usually with the intention of deception, and with a tendency of presenting non-critical aspects of a subject matter as critical, to serve a particular agenda. The word comes from the Sophists, a group of professional teachers in ancient Greece who were criticized by Socrates in Plato's dialogues for being shrewd and deceptive rhetoricians. Why is that word difficult? Okay, reading on. This kind of bad faith argument has no place in materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics must instead be rooted in a true and accurate understanding of the subject, material conditions, and reality in general. Eclecticism is an incoherent approach to philosophical inquiry, which attempts to draw from various different theories, frameworks, and ideas to understand the subject, applying different theories in different situations without any consistency in analysis and thought. Eclectic arguments are typically composed of various pieces of evidence that are cherry-picked and pieced together to form a perspective that lacks clarity. By definition, because they draw from different systems of thought without seeking a clear and cohesive understanding of the totality of the subject and its internal and external relations and its development over time, eclectic arguments run counter to the comprehensive and historical viewpoints. Eclecticism is somewhat similar to dialectical materialism in that it attempts to consider a subject from many different perspectives and analyzes relationships pertaining to a subject. But the major flaw of eclecticism is a lack of clear and coherent systems and principles, which leads to a chaotic viewpoint and an inability to grasp the true nature of the subject at hand. 2. Principle of development. A. Definition of development. According to the metaphysical viewpoint, development is simply a quantitative increase or decrease. The metaphysical viewpoint does not account for qualitative changes of things and phenomena. Simultaneously, the metaphysical viewpoint also views development as a process, or if you prefer, process, of continuous progressions which follow a linear and straightforward path. And now we come to annotation 117, which includes a graphic of a football team. Annotation 117. In materialist dialectics, it is important to distinguish between quantity and quality. Quantity describes the total amount of component parts that compose a subject. Quality describes the unity of component parts taken together, which defines the subject and distinguishes it from other subjects. Both quantity and quality are dynamic attributes. Over time, the quantity and quality of all things develop and change over time through the development of internal and external relationships. Quantity and quality itself form a dialectical relationship, and as quantity develops, quality will also develop. A given subject may be described by various quantity and quality relationships. And on your screen right now, you should see the example of the football team. Quantity 1 equal quality football player. And then it shows quantity 11 equal quality football team. In the process of development, the caption reads, quantity change equals to quality change. A single football player alone has the quantity value of one football player and the quality of a football player. 11 football players on the field would have the quantity value of 1 and will develop the quality of a football team. This subject, football team, is composed of the same component parts as the subject, football player. But the quantity change and other properties, being on the field, playing a game or practicing, etc., change the quality of the component parts into a different, stable, and unified form, which we call a football team. The relationship between quantity and quality is dynamic. If one of the players doesn't show up for practice, and there are only 10 players on the field, it might still have the quality of a football team, but in a live professional game, there will be a certain threshold, a minimum number of players who must be present to officially be considered a team. If this number of players can't be fielded, then they will not be considered a full team and thus won't be allowed to play. Likewise, if there are only 1 or 2 players practicing together in a park, they would probably not be considered a football team, though they might be described in terms of having the quality of being on the same team. And now you'll see on your screen, if you're watching rather than really listening, a graphic that shows a quantity to quality change between H2O rather, to billions of H2O molecules, and then of course 5,000 drops of water in a cup of water. And the label is development. Quantity change leads to quality change. All of these have the quality of water because of the molecular quantities of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. However, from the perspective of volume, quantity changes still lead to quality changes. The properties of quantity and quality are relative, depending on the viewpoint of analysis. A single molecule of water has the quantity of 1 in terms of molecules, but it still retains the quality of water because of the quantities of 1 oxygen atom and 2 hydrogen atoms per molecule, which in this stable form give it the quality of water. A drop of water might have a quantity of many billions of molecules, but it would still have the quality of water. It would also now assume the quality of a, quote, drop, end quote. When you combine enough drops of water, you will eventually have a quality shift, where the drops of water combine to form another quality, i.e., a cup of water. The quantity change leads to a change in quantity, or rather, the quantity change leads to a change in quantity. We would no longer think of the water in terms of drops after the quantity arises to a certain level. In terms of temperature and physical properties, if the water is heated to a certain point, it will boil and the water will become steam. The quantity of water in terms of drops won't change, but the quantity value of temperature would eventually lead to a quality change, or rather a quality value change from water to steam. And now on your screen, you will see a graphic from annotation 117 that shows the stages of a human life from infant to corpse. And it's labeled as quantity of age increases, quality changes. The same human being will undergo various quality changes as age quantity increases over time. As humans age and the quantity of years we've lived builds up over time, our quality also changes, from baby to child, to teenager, to young adult, to middle-aged, to old age, and eventually to death. The individual person is still the same human being, but the quality of the person will shift over time as the quantity value of age increases. And now you see this another graphic that's labeled metaphysical versus a dialectical materialist conceptions of change. The metaphysical conception of change is linear and quantity only. The materialist dialectic conception of change is fluid, dynamic, quantity plus quality. And the graphic is labeled metaphysics only consider linear properties of quantity change. Materialist dialectics takes quantity changes and quality shifts into consideration when considering change over time. Because the metaphysical perspective tries to define the world in terms of static, isolated subjects, only quantity is considered, and quality shifts are not taken into account. Thus, metaphysical logic sees development as linear, simple, and straightforward. Materialist dialectics, on the other hand, sees development as a more complicated, fluid, and dynamic process involving multiple internal and external relationships changing in quantity and quality over time. And that ends our reading for episode 6. When next you come here, when next we get together, I'll be continuing my read from annotation 118, which continues the discussion and also the visualization of the concept of change and quantity versus quality. One of the interesting things about the idea of quantity versus quality that occurs to me, particularly when the example of water was used, and water into steam, is that in physics this would also be called a state change, right? So, for example, a superheated gas is a plasma because the atoms of the gas are ionized by the input of energy into the gas flow. So here we see why earlier in this text the necessity of a dialectical, at the very least, and a materialist dialectical concept at best, was considered so important for science because, of course, nature itself is dialectical, and of course, indeed, materialist. And so earlier in the text, you recall the discussion of the movement from Hegel's idealism to materialist dialectics by science, but it's a movement that has not been matched by a movement of ideas. There hasn't been a quantity to quality shift in ideas in Western thought, at least, about these matters. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening, and we'll get together soon for episode 7 of the Dialectical House Party. Ciao for now.